The Mafia boss, kidnapped. The wrong curvy woman, the woman who changed a billionaire's empire forever. The hands that grabbed Elena Caldwell from behind were not gentle. They were fast, practiced, and completely certain they had the right person. The black cloth bag that dropped over her head smelled like motor oil and something sharper. The shove that followed sent her stumbling sideways into the back of a vehicle that was already moving before the door even closed. Her handbag hit the floor. Her phone slid under the seat. And the night outside, the warm, noisy, beautiful Milan night she had been walking through just 4 seconds ago, disappeared completely. Elena had been in Milan for exactly 6 days. She was there for a finance conference, one she had fought hard to attend, because her company only sent senior analysts, and she was not yet senior. She had stayed late at the closing dinner because her colleague, Nina Holt, had asked her to. Nina had left early. Elena had stayed, eaten dessert, drunk 1 glass of wine, and then walked toward the taxi line just as her phone battery died. She had been fumbling with a portable charger in her handbag when the hands came. She did not scream. The sound that almost left her throat was swallowed the moment she understood that screaming would do nothing useful. She breathed instead, slow and deep, the way her mother had taught her when she was small and afraid and the world felt too large and too cruel. Breathe first, think second, panic later, when you have the time. She was 31 years old. She had grown up in a small terraced house in Leeds, England, with her mother, who worked 2 jobs, and her younger brother, who had a talent for mathematics and a habit of losing his shoes. She had won a scholarship to study economics at the University of Edinburgh, had worked 3 part-time jobs while doing it, and had graduated with a first-class degree and a permanent look of quiet determination that her professors remembered long after she had left. She had spent 5 years climbing slowly but steadily through a financial consulting firm that underpaid her and underestimated her in equal measure. She had never once, in all of that time, been taken from a street in Milan and pushed into the back of a moving vehicle. But she had dealt with worse than fear. She had dealt with rent she could not pay, and bosses who took credit for her work, and a world that had decided before she walked into a room that she was not the right shape, or the right background, or the right kind of person for the kind of success she was reaching for. She had dealt with all of that without flinching. She breathed now, and she thought. The vehicle moved fast, through streets she could not see. She counted turns, left, right, a long straight stretch. A bridge, she thought, because the sound of the road changed beneath the tires for about 12 seconds, then slower roads, then gravel, then a complete stop. The bag came off her head in a large room with stone walls and expensive lighting. 2 men stood near the door. A third stood closer, looking at her with an expression that was not quite what she had expected. He was not smiling. He was not threatening. He was studying her with narrowed eyes, and a growing sense that something had gone very wrong. He was tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his mid-30s, though the weight he carried in his eyes made him seem older. He wore a plain dark shirt and trousers that were clearly expensive, and he stood with the kind of stillness that does not come from calm, but from long practice. His name was Dante Moretti. Elena did not know that yet. What she knew was that he was the man in charge of whatever this was, and he was currently looking at her the way a person looks when they have ordered a particular item in a restaurant and received something entirely different. She looked back at him and said, "I think you have made a mistake." The room went quiet. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of people who did not know how to respond to a woman who had just been pulled off a street and was speaking with the tone of someone reading out a meeting agenda. Dante Moretti looked at her for a long time. Then he said one word to the man on his left. The man left the room quickly. Dante looked back at Elena. "Sit down," he said. His English was slightly accented, smooth, and very controlled. "I would prefer to stand," she said, "and I would prefer to know why I am here and who you think I am. Because whoever you are looking for, I am not her." The man who had left returned a minute later. He was holding a photograph. He handed it to Dante, who looked at it, looked at Elena, looked at it again, and then closed his eyes briefly, in the way people do when they have made a very expensive mistake, and they know it, and there is absolutely nothing immediate they can do to fix it. The photograph showed a woman in a red dress. Elena was wearing a red dress. That was the extent of the similarity. The woman in the photograph was someone else entirely, harder-faced, lighter-eyed, with a very specific way of standing that had nothing to do with how Elena stood. Dante set the photograph face down on the table beside him. He looked at Elena. Elena looked at him. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena Caldwell," she said. "Financial analyst. Leeds, England. And whatever is happening here, I am going to need my phone charged, because I have a quarterly report due on Friday, and my supervisor is not a patient man." There was a pause that lasted several seconds. Then, from somewhere in the room, one of the guards made a sound that might, under different circumstances, have been the beginning of a laugh. He turned it into a cough very quickly. Dante Moretti did not laugh. He stared at Elena Caldwell with an expression she could not quite read, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness, not warmth, not yet anything that simple. Something more like the moment a person recognizes, without yet being willing to admit it, that they are standing in front of something unexpected. He left the room without another word. Elena sat down, because she chose to, and because her legs were, for the first time since this began, shaking slightly. She made them stop. She looked around the room and began, quietly and methodically, to take note of everything she could see. Elena woke the next morning in a room she had not chosen, but could not complain about in practical terms. The bed was large and firm. The sheets were clean. There was a window that looked out over a lake so wide and still, it looked like a painting, and the light coming through the glass was pale gold and soft, the kind of light that makes even difficult mornings feel briefly manageable. She had slept for 4 hours. She knew because she had counted the minutes for a long time before exhaustion finally overruled alertness. She had spent those hours thinking clearly and carefully about everything she knew, everything she did not know, and everything she needed to find out. When she woke, she was not rested, but she was ready. There was a clean set of clothes on the chair beside the door. Someone had brought them while she slept, which was unsettling, but the clothes were practical and the right approximate size, and she put them on. There was also a breakfast tray, coffee, bread, fruit, a small dish of olive oil. She ate everything on it. She needed her body to function, and hunger was not going to help her think. When the door opened, it was not Dante. It was a woman of about 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back neatly, and an expression that was professionally blank. She introduced herself only as Marta, and said she would take Elena to speak with the signore. Dante was in a large study on the ground floor. The room was full of books that had actually been read, and maps on the walls that were covered in handwritten marks. A desk dominated the center, and on the desk were several open folders and a laptop showing a spreadsheet that Elena, from across the room, could immediately see was structured incorrectly. The column allocations were off, and someone had mixed fixed and variable costs in a way that was going to cause serious reporting errors downstream. She sat down across from him. He looked at her without speaking for a moment, which she understood was a technique. She did not fill the silence. "You understand your situation," he said finally. "You grabbed the wrong person," she said. "Yes, I understand. It is more complicated than that now," he said. "I know," she said. "I have seen your face. I have seen this location, approximately. I have heard voices. You cannot simply drop me at the airport with an apology." She said it plainly, without drama. It was a fact, not a plea. "So what I want to know is what happens next, and I want an honest answer." He studied her. "You are not afraid." "I am afraid," she said. "I am simply choosing not to let that be the most useful thing I do with my time right now." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You will stay here for the time being. You will be comfortable. You will not be harmed. I give you my word." "Your word," she repeated. "Yes." She thought about it. She did not know how much his word was worth. But she was perceptive enough to read a room and a person, and what she read in Dante Moretti was not cruelty. There was control, and force of will, and a history behind his eyes that was clearly not simple, but what she was looking for was whether he was the kind of man who said one thing and did another, and she did not yet believe he was. "All right," she said. "In that case, I would like my phone. I have a report due Friday and a team that depends on my input. and disappearing without explanation will cause problems I would like to manage. You want to contact your office. I want to tell them I have had a personal emergency and will be unreachable for a few days. I will not tell them where I am, because I do not know exactly where I am, and I will not tell them what happened, because that would create a situation that helps neither of us. She paused. I am not your enemy, Mr. Moretti. I am a woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I would like to manage this inconvenience as professionally as possible for both our sakes. Something changed in the room. Not in Dante's face, not visibly, but in the air between them. A tension that had been there since she walked in shifted slightly, like a door that has been pushed on for a long time and moved, just slightly, on its hinges. He reached into the desk drawer and placed her phone on the desk between them. The battery had been charged. She picked it up, composed a short message to her supervisor. Personal emergency. Unreachable 3 to 5 days. Will manage deliverables remotely when possible. Then she put the phone in her pocket and looked at him again. Thank you, she said. He nodded slowly. Now, she said, and her gaze moved briefly to the spreadsheet still visible on the laptop. Whoever prepared that financial model made a significant structural error in the cost allocation across rows 14 through 22. I noticed it from across the room. I do not know if it matters to you, but it will matter when that document is used for anything that involves external scrutiny. Dante turned slowly in his chair and looked at the screen. Then he looked back at her. How do you know that from across the room? He asked. Because I have spent 5 years doing nothing but reading financial models, she said. I can see the structure. The colors alone tell me something is misaligned. There was a long pause. Show me, he said. She came around the desk. She sat in the chair beside his, pulled the laptop slightly toward her, and in 4 minutes she showed him 3 separate errors, explained what each would cause, and outlined the fastest way to correct them. She did it the way she did everything, clearly, without showing off, with precision, and a complete absence of condescension. When she was done, she pushed the laptop back and stood. Dante Moretti sat looking at the screen for a moment. Then he looked at her with an expression she was beginning to learn, one that she suspected not many people ever saw from him. It was the expression of a man who had not expected to be surprised, and had been. Marta will show you the library, he said. You may use it. You will have meals here or in the dining room, your choice. There is a garden on the east side that you are free to use in daylight. He paused. I will need to speak with you again tomorrow. About the spreadsheet? She asked. No, he said quietly. About something else. She nodded and left the room. In the hallway, Marta was waiting. Elena followed her and said nothing, but her mind was already moving forward at full speed, turning over what she had just seen, what she had just learned, and what the man behind that desk was carrying, that he had not said a single word about. She was good at reading numbers. She was also, though fewer people knew it, very good at reading people. And Dante Moretti, behind all that stillness and control and quiet authority, was a man standing on the edge of something that was starting to crack. She did not yet know what it was. She intended to find out. The library was 3 rooms down and better stocked than her local public library in Leeds had ever been. She pulled out a chair, sat down at the long reading table, and opened the notebook she had found in the desk drawer in her room. She wrote down everything she remembered about the spreadsheet. Then she started a second list, smaller, and written in the shorthand only she could read. At the top of the second list, she wrote one word: leverage. Not in the way it would be used by someone planning something dangerous. In the way it would be used by someone who knew that information, in the right hands, at the right moment, was the only real currency that never lost its value. She was going to need every advantage she could find, and she had just been handed the first one. 3 days passed. They were strange days, shaped by routines that had not been planned but formed anyway, the way routines always do when people share a space long enough. Elena ate breakfast in the dining room, which had tall windows and a view of the lake. She worked in the library for several hours each day, pushing through her quarterly report on a loaned laptop that had no internet access, except for a restricted professional pathway that had been set up, without explanation but correctly, by someone on the estate who clearly knew what they were doing. She walked in the East Garden every afternoon. She did not see Dante until the evenings. He came to the library at the end of the day, usually with a folder or a document that needed looking at. That was how he framed it, at least. Elena suspected by the third day that the documents were sometimes a reason rather than a purpose, and that he was coming to the library because the library was where she was, and whatever Dante Moretti thought about that, it was not something he had worked out yet. She did not point this out. She was not in the business of making things harder than they needed to be. What she was in the business of, increasingly, was understanding what was happening inside the financial structure of the legitimate side of Dante Moretti's operations, not because she had asked to be, because the documents he kept bringing her, one by one, were showing her a picture that was becoming clearer with every new piece. The hotel group came first, 14 properties across Italy, Croatia, and Montenegro, performing below their market potential by 20 to 30%. Not because the properties were poor, she could see that they were well maintained and well reviewed, but because the pricing strategy was being applied uniformly across all 14 locations, regardless of their individual demand profiles. Someone had built a single pricing model and applied it to every hotel, which was the kind of mistake a person makes when they know systems but not markets. The logistics company was next, a freight operation with contracts across 6 European countries. The routing inefficiencies she found in the third document were significant but fixable. Someone had been prioritizing contract volume over delivery optimization, which was costing the company in fuel, in driver hours, and in penalty clauses they were quietly absorbing rather than renegotiating. By the time Dante placed the third folder in front of her on the fourth evening, Elena set down her pen and looked at him directly. "You are not just asking me to check documents," she said. He sat down across from her. For a moment he said nothing. "No," he said. "You have a legitimate business portfolio that is significantly underperforming," she said. "And you have had it for several years, based on what I can see in the historical data you showed me on Tuesday. You have been sustaining it rather than growing it, and not because you do not have the capital. You have the capital. The issue is structural. Your management layer understands operations but not financial strategy, and whoever has been advising you professionally has been telling you what you want to hear rather than what you need to know." Dante's expression did not change, but his hands, she noticed, had gone very still on the table. "I want to know," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "That is actually why I am telling you." She opened the notebook in front of her, to a page she had been filling for the past 2 days. Not because he had asked her to, because she could not look at a broken system without wanting to fix it. She took him through it, not the way a consultant gives a presentation, polished and performed, but the way a person explains something to another person who is genuinely listening and genuinely intelligent and simply does not have the specific knowledge she has. She was direct. She used plain language. She did not soften the parts that were uncomfortable. By the time she finished, the room was darker than it had been when they started. Marta had come in at some point and lit the lamps without either of them noticing. Dante looked at the notebook for a long moment. Then he said, "How do you see all of this so quickly?" "I was trained to," she said. "But also, I have always been the kind of person who notices when something does not add up. I notice it in numbers. I notice it in people." She paused. "I noticed it in you, the first evening." He looked up. "You are under pressure," she said. "Not from this situation, not from me. Something larger, something that was happening before I arrived. The documents you are bringing me are not random. You are trying to understand something, and you are using me to do it, because I can see things your own people cannot, or will not." A silence settled over the room. Outside, the lake was invisible in the dark. "There is a group," he said at last. "A group of people who have been, for the last year, positioning themselves to take control of my legitimate companies. Not through competition, through acquisition. They have been buying influence quietly. Small shares in the right hands. Pressure on the right suppliers. They are not interested in running the hotels or the freight operation. They are interested in what those companies own. Land, licenses, port access. Things that cannot be bought quickly or openly." Elena listened without interrupting. "If they succeed in freezing my operating accounts," he said, "the legitimate businesses collapse within 90 days. Everything is connected. The cash flow from the hotel group services debt on the logistics company. The logistics company holds the licenses that the port access depends on. It is designed to work together, but that also means that if one part is attacked, the whole structure is vulnerable. He said it with the steadiness of a man who had already looked this possibility in the eye and decided not to look away from it. But underneath the steadiness was something Elena recognized, because she had felt it herself in different circumstances. It was the specific tiredness of a person who has been carrying something alone for too long. "Who is leading this group?" she asked. "A man named Callum Hart," he said. "He presents himself as a venture capital investor. He is based in London. He has never once broken a law that can be proven. Everything he does is structured to be legal. That is what makes him dangerous." Elena wrote the name in her notebook. She underlined it once. "And your own advisors," she said. "Your financial and legal people. They have not been able to stop this?" "They have been trying," he said. "They are not incompetent, but they are working with the information they have, and the information they have is not enough. Harte has structured this to be almost invisible from the outside. You can only see it clearly if you understand how all the pieces fit together across the whole portfolio. And you have been looking for someone who can do that," she said. "I have been looking for someone I can trust to do that," he said, with an emphasis on the word trust that made very clear how rarely he used it and how much it cost him to say it. Elena was quiet for a moment. She looked at the notebook. She looked at the name she had written. Then she looked at Dante Moretti. "I want two things," she said. "First, I want full access to every financial document connected to all three of your legitimate business arms, not selected documents. Everything. Second, I want to speak to your legal team directly, without you in the room, so that they will speak to me plainly, and not through whatever filter they use when you are present." Dante's eyes did not move from hers. "Those are your terms for helping me. They are my requirements for doing this properly," she said. "I will not do it halfway. If I am going to help you protect something, I need to see the whole thing." He considered this. It did not take long. "Done," he said. She nodded. She closed the notebook. She looked at the lamp on the table, burning steadily in the dark room. "Callum Hart, she said. "I want to know everything about him by tomorrow morning. Not what your people think they know. The actual record. Every company he has touched in the last 10 years. Every acquisition, every failure, every pattern. The pattern is where the weakness will be." Dante said nothing. He was looking at her with the same expression she had first seen in the room with the stone walls, the one she could not yet fully name, but which she was beginning to understand had something to do with the fact that in a lifetime of surrounding himself with people who were either loyal out of fear or useful out of self-interest, he had not, until 4 days ago, met someone who was simply, plainly, genuinely capable. He stood. He picked up the folder from the table. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 6:30, she said. "I am an early riser." She heard, very faintly, as he walked to the door, something that might, under the right conditions and with enough generosity, have been called a quiet laugh. She looked back at her notebook. She wrote 6 words at the bottom of the page. Find the pattern, break the chain. Then she started planning. The files arrived at 5:45 the next morning, before Elena had finished her first cup of coffee. 2 members of Dante's staff carried them in carefully, 6 large boxes of physical documents and 3 external hard drives containing digital records. They stacked everything neatly against the library wall, placed a fresh pot of coffee on the table, and left without a word. Elena stood in front of the boxes for a moment. She was wearing the second of the 2 outfits Marta had sourced for her. Her hair was up. Her notebook was open. She had slept 5 hours and felt, despite that, entirely alert. She started with the digital records. Callum Hart's professional history was long, clean, and extremely carefully constructed. His venture capital firm, Hart Strategic Group, had been operating out of London for 11 years. In that time, it had made 43 investments across hospitality, logistics, and infrastructure across Europe. 30 of those investments had generated healthy returns. 8 had failed. 5 were ongoing. The 5 ongoing investments were the ones that mattered. Elena mapped them out on paper first. the way she always worked when trying to see a full structure, by hand, slowly, building the picture before she trusted it to any screen. She drew lines between companies, noted shared board members, tracked the timing of acquisition moves, and looked for the thing she always looked for first in any complex financial structure: the thing that did not fit. It took her until mid-morning to find it, and when she found it, she sat back in her chair and stared at the paper for a long time. Callum Hart was not buying his way into Dante's companies through financial pressure alone. He was doing something more sophisticated and considerably more dangerous. Over the past 14 months, he had been quietly acquiring minority stakes in 5 companies that were not Dante's, but that were critical suppliers and service providers to Dante's hotel group and logistics operation. A linen supplier, a fleet maintenance contractor, a customs clearance firm, a cold storage company, a port operations subcontractor. None of these acquisitions, individually, looked like anything meaningful. They were small stakes in small companies. But together, they formed a ring. If Hart chose to, he could direct all 5 of these supplier companies to simultaneously change their terms, raise their prices to unworkable levels, delay their services, or simply withdraw from their contracts. Under the terms of those contracts, Dante's companies would have 60 days to find replacements. In a normal market, that would be manageable, but the cold storage company held a regulatory approval that took 18 months to transfer. The customs clearance firm operated under a license that was specific to the port they serviced. There were no immediate replacements for either. The plan was elegant and quiet and almost invisible until you looked at all 5 pieces at the same time. Elena wrote it out in full, clearly, in plain language that anyone could understand. She wrote what it meant, what it would do to Dante's cash flow, how quickly the damage would spread, and where the single most important pressure point was. The customs clearance firm, that was the one that would break first and hurt most, and the license that firm held had a renewal application that was currently sitting with the Italian Transport Authority, pending a routine review that was scheduled for 6 weeks from now. If that renewal was delayed, or denied, the entire supply chain around the port contracts collapsed. She looked at the calendar she had written in the top corner of the page. 6 weeks. That was how long they had. When Dante came to the library at noon, Elena was standing at the large table with her papers spread out in a precise layout, each section connected by lines drawn in red pen. She had also, that morning, spoken with his legal team for 40 minutes. The lawyer, a precise woman named Claire Whitfield who flew in from Rome, had not softened anything, which Elena respected, and had confirmed 3 pieces of information that completed the picture. Dante came into the room and stopped when he saw the layout on the table. He came closer. He stood beside Elena and looked at it. She walked him through it, everything. The 5 companies, the ring structure, the customs license, the 6-week window. She explained it the way she had explained the spreadsheet errors on the first day, directly, without drama, with complete clarity. When she finished, the room was quiet. "He has been building this for over a year," Dante said. 14 months, she confirmed. "He is patient. He does not rush. He waits for the structure to be complete before he moves. That is his method across every acquisition I looked at in his history. He builds the trap first, then he closes it." Dante was looking at the paper. His jaw was set. His voice when he spoke was very even, the way a voice becomes when the person using it is keeping something larger very carefully under control. "What do we do?" he said. "3 things," Elena said, "in this order. First, we file an application to preemptively transfer the customs clearance license to a new holding company that is structured under your legitimate portfolio. That insulates it from any contract pressure Callum Hart can apply to the current operator. It is a legal move. It will take time, but Claire's team can begin today. Second, we approach the 3 other supplier companies in the ring before Hart activates them. Not aggressively. We make their current contracts more attractive. We renegotiate terms that give them a reason to stay loyal, and we quietly make them aware that their new minority shareholder may not have their best long-term interests in mind. Third, we go to the Port Authority directly, not through the Transport Regulatory Channel, but through the Regional Economic Development Board, which has the authority to accelerate license renewals on the basis of regional employment impact. The freight operation employs 340 people in that region. That is a significant argument. Dante listened to all of it without interrupting. The second step, he said when she finished. Approaching the supplier companies. How do we do that without alerting Hart that we have seen the structure? We do not approach them as you, she said. I approach them as an independent financial advisor, conducting a portfolio efficiency review on behalf of a client. It is entirely normal. It raises no flags. I have done it dozens of times in my career. I know exactly how to have those conversations. Dante looked at her. You would do that. I would do that, she said. Why? She held his gaze steadily. Because it needs doing. Because I can do it. And because I am here. And I have seen this. And I am not the kind of person who sees something broken and walks away from it. He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before. Something gentler and less guarded than his usual expression. And he looked away from her before she could fully read it. Claire will need your help structuring the license transfer application, he said. I know, Elena said. I will meet with her this afternoon. He nodded. He put his hands in his pockets. He stood looking at the paper on the table for a few more seconds, and she had the sense that he was not looking at the paper anymore, but at something further away. Elena, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She looked at him. When this is over, he said, and I will make it possible for it to be over for you. You will be free to leave, with my word that nothing from this will follow you. Your name will not appear anywhere. Your involvement will not be known. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said simply. He nodded and walked to the door. 6:30 tomorrow, he said, without looking back. I will be here, she said. She turned back to the table. She picked up her pen. She drew one more line on the paper, connecting a point she had overlooked that morning, and wrote 3 words beside it. This is winnable. The next 4 weeks moved differently from any 4 weeks Elena had experienced before. Not because they were slower or faster, but because they had weight to them. Every day carried the density of real consequence. Every meeting mattered. Every decision had edges. She spent her mornings with Claire Whitfield's team, who had flown 2 additional associates from Rome to assist. The license transfer application was complex and required careful documentation of the employment and economic impact data, which Elena pulled together from the logistics company's own records, with the kind of systematic efficiency that made Claire, a measured and professionally skeptical woman, eventually look at her across the conference table and say, with complete sincerity, I do not know where he found you, but I am glad he did. Elena smiled and said nothing about how the finding had actually occurred. The afternoons she used for the supplier meetings. She traveled to 4 of the 5 companies herself, presenting as an independent advisor, which was entirely accurate. She met with owners and operations managers in offices and factory floors, and one memorable conversation in a boat shed beside a canal. She was warm and professional, and completely direct, and she had the specific ability that very few people develop, of making the person across from her feel that they were the most important part of the conversation, which they were. 3 of the 4 companies she visited renegotiated their supply terms within 2 weeks. The 4th required a second conversation, but came through. The linen supplier's owner, a sharp-eyed man named Frank Oldfield who had been in the business for 30 years and had seen every kind of deal and every kind of pressure, looked at Elena at the end of their second meeting and said, Whoever you are working for is lucky to have someone like you doing this. I will pass that on, she said. The customs clearance license was the most critical and the most complex. Claire's team worked around the clock on the application. Elena reviewed every draft, caught 2 structural issues that would have caused delays, and spent one very long evening on the phone with a regional economic development official who had questions about the employment impact data that needed careful, accurate, well-supported answers. She gave him all of them. In those 4 weeks, Elena also spent most evenings with Dante, not discussing the situation, though they discussed the situation plenty, but also, increasingly, simply talking. She had not expected that. She was not sure, early on, that she had wanted it. But Dante Moretti, stripped of urgency and the formalized weight of his public role, was not the man she had first read in that stone-walled room. He was intelligent, in the specific way of someone who had learned everything the hard way, and had not forgotten any of it. He was, she discovered, deeply interested in history, particularly in the history of economic systems, and how they had shaped the societies around them, which was the kind of interest that surprised her, and then, on reflection, made complete sense for a man whose entire life had been built inside and around structures of power. He was also, beneath the control and the stillness, quietly funny in a way that he seemed almost embarrassed by, as though humor was something he had not used enough to be entirely comfortable with. She did not tell him that she found it charming. She did not tell him a number of things because she was practical, and the situation was what it was, and she was not the kind of woman who added complication to something that already had enough. But she noticed. She noticed the way he refilled her coffee before his own, the way he listened to her when she spoke, not waiting for his turn to talk but actually following what she was saying, asking questions that proved he had been paying attention, the way he stood just slightly closer than was strictly necessary when they were both looking at the same document. She noticed. She filed it away. She moved on. On the 31st day since she had been brought to the estate, Claire Whitfield called at 7 in the morning and told Elena that the license transfer application had been approved by the regional authority, processed on the basis of economic impact, and formally registered. The customs clearance operation was now held within Dante's legitimate portfolio structure. Callum Harte's position in the former operator company was now commercially meaningless. Elena said thank you, put down the phone, and sat at the library table for a quiet moment. Then she went to find Dante. He was in the study. He was already on a call, but he ended it when he saw her face. She told him. He was very still for a moment. Then he said something quiet in Italian that she did not speak but understood was significant. The other steps followed over the next 2 weeks. Hart's position across the supplier companies had been effectively neutralized by the new contract terms. His carefully constructed ring had been disassembled from the inside, legally and cleanly, without a single confrontation. He had not yet moved, which meant he still believed his structure was intact. By the time he discovered it was not, there would be nothing left for him to activate. Claire confirmed the final piece 3 days later. Hart's holding company had begun selling off its stakes in 3 of the 5 supplier companies, quietly, without announcement, the way a person withdraws when they have looked at the board and seen that the game is already decided. It was over. Elena stood at the lake on the morning that final confirmation came through. In the early light, the water perfectly still, the air cold and fresh, and smelling of pine and distance. She had been at the estate for nearly 6 weeks. She had arrived as a mistake, and stayed as something she still did not have a clean name for. She heard footsteps on the path behind her. She did not turn around. Dante came to stand beside her. They were quiet for a while, watching the lake. "Claire is preparing the papers for your departure," he said. "Everything you need. A flight, a car, your personal documents. Your firm has been told you were dealing with a family medical situation. There will be no questions." "Thank you," she said. Elena. His voice was different from how it had been that first day, quieter, carrying something it had not carried before, or had carried for a long time, and only now allowed through. "I owe you something that I do not have a word for." She looked at him then. He was looking at the lake, not at her, the way people look away from something when they are being more honest than they are comfortable being. "You do not owe me anything," she said. "I did what I am good at." "You did more than that," he said. She did not argue. She was not sure he was wrong. "I want you to consider something," he said. He reached into his jacket and held out an envelope. "It is not a contract. It is not an offer of employment. It is a proposal for a formal consulting arrangement, independent, on your terms, for the restructuring of the legitimate portfolio. The things you identified in the first week, the hotel pricing strategy, the logistics optimization, they still need doing, and I want someone who will tell me the truth." He paused. "I want you." She took the envelope. She looked at it. "I live in Leeds," she said. "I know. I have a job. I know that too. And I was brought here against my will." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That is not something I can change or undo, but it is something I will carry for a long time." She believed him. She did not know entirely why, but she had trusted her own reading of people for long enough to trust it now. She put the envelope in her pocket. "I will read it on the plane," she said. He nodded. "And then," she said, "I will think about it." He looked at her then, properly, for the first time that morning, and what was in his face was something she had not seen from him before, not even in the quieter evenings in the library, when he had been more unguarded than usual. It was hope, unadorned, slightly uncomfortable, and very real. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked back at the lake. 6 weeks, she said quietly. "I came here as a mistake. I stayed, and I fixed things I was not asked to fix, because that is simply who I am. And you watched, and you listened, and you did not once try to take credit for what I built." She paused. "That matters." "I know it does," he said. The light on the lake was changing, warming, the gold of early morning, giving way to something fuller and brighter. A bird moved across the surface in the far distance, leaving a thin line that disappeared almost immediately. Elena turned and walked back toward the estate. She had a flight in 3 hours. She had things to pack and a life to return to. She had a report to finally submit, and a supervisor to manage, and a flat in Leeds with slightly noisy pipes, and a very good bakery on the corner that she had been thinking about more than she would have expected. She had, also, an envelope in her pocket. She did not look back at Dante as she walked, but she was aware, without looking, that he watched her go. She was also aware that the envelope felt different from what she had expected. Not like an offer, like a beginning. 3 months later, the piece appeared in a business publication based in Frankfurt. It was not a front-page story. It was buried on page 14 of the European markets section, a short analytical paragraph about the quiet resurgence of a mid-sized Italian logistics and hospitality group that had, in the space of 6 months, restructured its pricing model, optimized its freight routing across 6 national contracts, and secured 3 new long-term partnership agreements with port authorities in 2 countries. The article credited the turnaround to a newly appointed independent strategic advisor based in the United Kingdom, and noted, briefly, that the group was now projecting revenue growth of 22% in the coming financial year. It did not name Elena Caldwell. She read the piece on a Tuesday morning at a table in a hotel meeting room in Milan, on her 3rd visit in 3 months. She had kept her flat in Leeds. She had negotiated a reduced schedule at her consulting firm that allowed her to continue her existing client commitments while taking on the Moretti portfolio work. She had been clear with herself and with Dante about what she was and was not doing. And she had been equally clear that the arrangement would only work if it remained professional in structure, even if the evenings when she and Dante sat in the library and talked about things that had nothing to do with business were becoming longer and more frequent in a way that neither of them had, yet, formally addressed. She was working on the logistics routing model when Dante came into the meeting room with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her without being asked. "The Frankfurt piece," she said, without looking up. "Page 14. "I saw it," he said, sitting down across from her. 22% projection, she said. "That is conservative. Based on the new port agreement and the pricing recalibration, it is closer to 28 if the Croatian properties hit their revised occupancy targets by April." "Claire said the same thing," he said. "Claire is good," Elena said. "You should give her more direct access to the operational data. She is working around gaps she should not have to work around." "I will speak to her." Elena made a note. She turned a page. "There is something else," Dante said. She looked up. "The shipping group," he said. "The one that holds the southern port licenses. The owner is looking to exit. He has approached 3 buyers in the last month. None of them have the right structure to absorb the licenses cleanly." Elena set her pen down. "But you do." "If I moved quickly and carefully," he said, "it would require restructuring how the license transfers are registered, which is where Claire's team would need to lead, and it would require someone who can negotiate the acquisition price without the seller understanding the full value of what he is selling. Someone who can read the numbers and the room," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the same expression she had first seen in this city, in a completely different context, the expression of a man who had been surprised and had not yet decided what to do with the surprise. She had spent 3 months watching that expression ease, slowly, into something more settled, something that looked, more and more, like the face of a person who was becoming accustomed to being seen clearly by someone, and found, against all expectation, that he did not want to look away. "Send me everything on the shipping group by Friday," she said. "I will have a full analysis and a proposed acquisition structure for you by Monday. And the negotiation?" She picked her pen back up. "I will lead it." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Not about business, not about the acquisition, but with the quiet directness he used when he was being most honest. Do you know what I think about when you are not here?" She did not stop writing, but her hand slowed, just slightly. "I think about the 6 words you said," he continued, "the first night. I think you have made a mistake. I had made mistakes in my life before that night, many of them, but that one turned out to be the only one that led somewhere I did not expect to find." She finished her note. She put the pen down. She looked at him. "It was not a mistake," she said simply. "It was a wrong turn that led to the right place." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what it was." Outside the hotel windows, Milan was bright and moving and loud with ordinary life. Cars and voices, and the smell of coffee and bread, and a city that had been built over centuries on the idea that beauty and commerce and ambition were not separate things but the same thing, expressed differently. Inside the meeting room, Elena Caldwell and Dante Moretti sat across a table covered in financial documents and looked at each other with the careful, clear-eyed recognition of 2 people who had arrived at this moment through the most unlikely route imaginable and were, both of them, quietly and without drama, grateful for it. She pulled the next folder toward her. "Monday," she said. He picked up his coffee. "Monday," he agreed. They went back to work, and the empire that had once been standing on the edge of a quiet collapse grew, steadily and surely, into something new. Not because of force, and not because of fear, but because one woman had walked into a broken system and refused, in her particular and precise and completely unshakable way, to leave it broken. That was the story the Frankfurt article did not tell. It was the one that mattered most.